serving spiritual seekers around the world. Unity Online Radio. Thank you for tuning in for this Unity Partner Program. Unity Online Radio partners with spiritual leaders from organizations whose mission and messages complement Unity's. We are pleased to bring you this program on Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
Welcome to New World Now with your host, Kim Corbin. It's one thing to read or write a book that has the power to change our lives. It's another to live the principles and teachings from those books each day on a moment-to-moment basis. Host Kim Corbin's intention with each of her interviews is to empower us to do just that, as she talks with authors published by New World Library. They will discuss their personal journeys and share practical tools we can use to be more aware, mindful, and present in our daily lives. Now, here is your host, Kim Corbin.
Many have pointed out the psychological benefits of clearing out the clutter in our surroundings. But what do we do with emotional clutter, the psychological versions of the jam-packed closet or our overstuffed garage? This is what I'm going to be talking with our guest today, Donald Altman, about. Donald is the author of 1 Minute Mindfulness, The Mindfulness Code, and most recently, Clearing Emotional Clutter, mindfulness practices for letting go of what's blocking your fulfillment and transformation. Donald is a practicing psychotherapist and a former Buddhist monk who teaches in the neurobiology program at Portland State University. Donald has a wonderful way of presenting the science of mindfulness in a really practical way. So I'm very much looking forward to our conversation, and I'm really happy that you're here with me today, Donald.
Oh, thanks, Kim. Well, it's a pleasure for me, too, to finally get on the phone with you and to do this, especially for the Unity audience. And I feel very grateful to have this opportunity.
Me too. And I thought we could start out by having you explain what emotional clutter is and how it can affect us.
Sure. The one thing about physical clutter is you can see it, and it really does get in your way, and it is always on your mind. But emotional clutter is often invisible, and it can block our ability to function effectively, to experience joy, and yet it's something that could be swirling around in our mind for maybe years, and we're not even aware of it, right? So what's really important is begin to notice the clutter. What I like to do is often, I do workshops around the world, and I like to ask this question. I'd like to ask the people listening in today, how many have you counted the number of thoughts you've had this morning? And if you want to really understand clutter, you want to understand how many thoughts can just populate our minds, just like that clutter that's filling up the attic or the garage. And scientists have said we have approximately, I've heard a range from 25 thoughts per second to 125 thoughts per second. Wow. The Buddha thought we could have 3,000 thought moments per second. I said that in a workshop one time, and a lady raised her hand, Kim, and she said, I have 4,000. So the mind can be very fast. Even if you looked at that low range of 25 thoughts per second, I've computed that out. That's about 75,000 thoughts in the course of a day. And, how many of those thoughts tell you something really profound about who you are? Right? How many of those are accurate thoughts even, but how many of them are just maybe conditioned thoughts, and they might be old habitual thoughts, reactive thoughts. And so what happens is we often grab onto those, and we can identify with them and think, oh, that's who I am. And in clearing emotional clutter, my hope is that people can actually learn the skill. This is a very skills-oriented book. I also bring in a lot of science and research as well, but to show us how to literally constructively distance from that clutter and view it in a different way, change your relationship with it, and then to start to sweep it away, sweep it out, whether it's old clutter from your past, whether it's clutter worries about tomorrow, or whether it's present-day clutter that builds up just like tartar, right, builds up on your teeth day to day, and you need to brush it away.
And it also seems like there's a balance there, because I think in our culture that so many people's tendency is to want to just sweep emotions away as soon as they happen. So it seems like there's some kind of a balance there. And
I think it's worth mentioning. I'm glad you brought that up, because we're not talking about sweeping away emotions, which can tell us a lot about how we're experiencing this moment and whether we're being adaptable or not. You know, a lot of negative emotions that we have, sometimes they serve a purpose. And the brain actually has what's called a negativity bias. So it focuses on things that might be perceived as threats, and that can help us survive, right? But if we hold on to those, and that becomes our default way of just experiencing life each day, then we're going to miss out on the good things. So the brain can, it will remember that one negative thing that maybe just happened for like a second or two, right? And I can remember the time when I was walking by a beach in Southern California, and as I was taking a step in this brushy area, as I was walking out to the shoreline, I heard a rattling noise, and I instantly jumped, and that was the survival part of my brain. I didn't have to think, oh, what is that that's rattling? Somehow, this survival part of my brain, which is really deep in the core of the emotional brain, and very much is part of what we share with reptiles and other mammals too, just recognize this was a danger, and it turned out to be a rattlesnake. And that part of the brain operates almost unconsciously, very much more quickly than the thinking part of the brain. But if it's always turned on and it perceives danger where there isn't any, then we need to do something about it. So you have a good point there.
Right. So it's really if an emotion it's sticking around too long, kind of like clutter. Like when we get something new, it's not clutter, but if we have it around, it's not really serving us anymore. That's when we need to look at it.
Yeah. Or if you're grabbing onto it and you're and it's pulling you forward. I think of the metaphor of getting on a train. And so let's say you have anxious thoughts, and a lot of people have anxious thoughts or worries about the future. And if you step on that train of thoughts, you can think of it as a train of thoughts, that is going to carry you somewhere. I often ask people I work with, I say, so if you get on that anxiety train, where does it take you? Where do you go at the end of the line? And they've said things like, oh, I go to Anxietyville. or panic land, right?
Yeah.
And that's not a great place to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And as you said, there's so much science in the book. I just underlined so many different studies, and I was like, wow, there's so much being done. And one that really stuck out to me was that researchers asked participants to be alone in a room with their thoughts for just 6 to 15 minutes. And a third to a half of them cheated by listening to music or checking their phones. Right. And then in another study, they had the opportunity to be alone with their thoughts or give themselves a voluntary electric shock, and half of them gave themselves the electric shock.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, why are we so
We'd rather be
so afraid?
Distracted. Yeah, we'd rather be distracted than just be alone with our thoughts. I mean, another study showed that, a large percent of people have scary, intrusive thoughts. So, if you're distracted, well, I don't know, maybe I won't have that thought. But the thing about mindfulness is that and this is very much a book that is steeped in mindfulness, is that we can look at whatever is arising in the mind, in the body, and also in our relationships, and we can deal with it and face it, not escape from it, right? We can actually look at it and confront it, and we can say, look at that thought. I compare it to you're watching a scary movie. You're on the edge of your seat, and we've all been there. I love scary movies as a kid, but then all of a sudden, and that's what our mind does. It can scare us. But then what if all of a sudden you're in the movie and somebody flips on the light switch And so all of a sudden you're sitting in this theater and there's the movie on the screen, and you realize that it's a movie being projected, and suddenly not so scary, is it?
Right.
And
you don't have
so
to
it's the same thing with So it's the same thing
don't
here.
Don't believe all your thoughts.
Right. So we can turn the light on in our mind, which is how we can clear that clutter. And we suddenly realize, oh, wait, this is a projection in my mind, the same way as I'm sitting in that theater. And it can give us a sense of, really a sense of peace and a sense of self-compassion for ourselves, that, you know, and our suffering. And I talk about suffering in the book. I think it's important for us to recognize and actually from the suffering.
Mm-hmm. I didn't actually catch that last part there.
That by recognizing our suffering, that can actually free us from it. So we start to recognize, oh wait, you know, this is I'm suffering because I'm wanting things to be other than as they are. I'm resisting this moment or whatever that is. And when you come into that recognition, that realization, it gives you a sense of a kind of a self-compassion for yourself, recognizing, oh, you know, this is my own something that I'm struggling with. And that self-compassion can be very helpful, very healing. And so we need to recognize that everybody suffers in some way. If you have a human body and a human mind, you're going to experience loss. You're going to have you're going to have those scary thoughts, and everyone experiences that. That's part of being human, along with the beautiful things that happen in our lives. Right? Everything is it's all mixed. It's not one or the other, but what we can do is we can help to by having that recognition, and we can change our relationship in that moment to that suffering, and we can come to understand and be more compassionate toward ourselves and others.
Mm-hmm. And I loved your chapter on inner Facebooking, which reminds me, Shakti Gawain used to say that if we checked our emails as often as we checked our intuitive messages, we'd be in much better shape. So it reminds me, it has that flavor to it, which I love. And basically the idea is that our minds are constantly sending posts to ourselves and our bodies, and being aware of what those posts are, which I love. And in that chapter, you talk about another study that showed that the practice of naming our emotions as we experience them makes it easier to kind of have that detachment and compassion that you're talking about, and not react to it. And I love the story that you shared about your own road rage and how that naming process helps. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think we've all been there. We all have some kind of trigger, right, or something that could, throw us off. And that research about the naming is a very important research in the mindfulness field. It shows that if you name the emotion, let's say you're angry, like I was in my car and somebody would cut me off, and I had an old pattern of this, and of course growing up in Chicago, on the freeway and having to be in rush hour day after day, that can happen to somebody. And so you would have this kind of knee-jerk reaction. But what I learned was that if I was able to just notice the anger and notice it in my body, where is this anger in my body? It's able to detach from grabbing onto the anger for a moment and separating from it a little bit, naming it, anger. And where is it in my body, and what's the intensity of it? And when I did that, now the anger, I changed my relationship with it at a very profound level. The anger became the object of my attention. And what that actually does in terms of brain science is it sends a signal that actually quiets down or inhibits the stress part of the brain. So actually, by the naming, you're balancing yourself out. And I've worked with clients, and I've seen this really work with people. There was I want to share a really powerful story of a woman I worked with, and she had binge eating disorder. So that means that she'd feel really bad, and she would go into a drive-through restaurant, for example, and she'd buy just tons of stuff. I don't know how many thousands of calories, and she'd binge on that. Then she'd feel horrible, But what I had her do is I said, what is that feeling you have that's making you want to go in and eat? And she said, well, I don't really know. And so I said, look, I want you to go, the next time this happens, I want you to go into the parking lot and just sit and until you can identify and name that feeling. And when she came back, it was amazing. She shared it in the whole group. She said, I had that feeling I was going to go binge, but I sat in the parking lot, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. She sat there. I mean, it was very courageous of her to do that. And then she said, and I finally realized this feeling I had was loneliness. She said, I had never identified it before. She said, once I knew what it was, I didn't have to go through the drive-through window. That wasn't going to take the loneliness away.
Right.
And she drove off. So that's a great example of how that naming process and getting a little more closer to how we're really feeling can be helpful. That also means you get into the body in order to do that.
Yeah, the body has a lot to do with it, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. And it really does. And that's why I have a lot of experiences. What I call the mindful lifestyle tools in the book, in the Cultural Clutter book. And those tools, many of them are designed to help us get into the body, which can be very grounding and centering. And because we're a very mental culture, right? We get stuck up in the head and in that clutter. And so when you drop into the body, research shows you actually kind of pull the plug on that spinning of all those stories that are running in your head. Right.
I actually had it with the inner naming thing on my last week was my very first podcast, and I interviewed Mark Allen. And when it was pre-recorded, luckily, and when I did my first intro, I was so nervous. I mean, it was just like my voice was shaking, and luckily we had a bad connection, and I got to start over again. But and we were talking about it afterwards, and I was able to. It really helped me in my own process to be able to name what was going on in that moment. Was that my anxiety was stronger than my presence. And just being able to see that and name it, then as I got ready for this one, I'm like, I'm anxious, and it really, as I used your tool in preparing, and I feel a lot calmer this time.
Oh, great! That's cool, and I'm honored. I even emailed you and said I was honored to follow Mark and as your second guest on the show, but that's great that you're able to use it. I've seen it. It really, this is something that I use too.
Yeah, and that was actually when I thought about who I wanted to interview. I thought, well, I've had a lot, the anxiety around doing something new coming up, and then also, and I'm curious your thoughts about this, and I'm wondering if it's emotional clutter or if it's just the newness of doing something new. I'll have just like a major emotional release, like crying almost, and I'm like, is that, and I see like Olympic athletes when they see something they've done that they have an emotional release, but I'm like, it's just interesting. Like, is that, what is that emotion? And I'm not able to name it yet, but so that's
it's almost, and that happens afterwards.
Yeah, once it's a sense of completion, it's almost like relief, and I haven't quite been able to identify what it is yet.
It might be a kind of joy, actually.
Yeah, it does feel like that somewhat. Yeah. And maybe it's, it's the self-doubting part of myself as well that's like, I don't know, just...
So you let go of that, and it's like, oh, you see, I was able to do what I overcame that obstacle, and it just feels good, and it's kind of an elation.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because I don't cry that much, and so I'm like, what is going on with all these tears? I love your section on hope and the importance of hope. And I wanted to read something you wrote in that chapter. It's only by setting free our clutter that we can connect with hope. So long as we cling to despair and negativity, hope is buried, unreachable, and unattainable at the bottom of our clutter pile. And I think that hope is something that in our world right now is lacking for a lot of people, and it's so important. So can you talk about the importance of hope and how we can generate it?
Yeah, I think when it comes to hope, what's important is that we that we do something for someone else.
Yes,
it can give us hope by helping another person, and it can help us feel like we're participating, like we're part of what's happening. That we don't have to depend on someone outside of ourselves to make things better in the world. And so I think that. One way to improve our hope is to give hope to another person, and that's a beautiful thing when you think about it, isn't it? And to not even expect when it might come about. I I've seen different times that, a situation will present itself where you maybe have an opportunity to share something with someone, and it might be your expertise. It could be some gift that you have, and everybody has a gift. And I think sometimes we forget to think that even the ordinary daily work that we do is really a gift, and maybe we can share our expertise with somebody. I remember a gentleman who gave hope to people by giving them haircuts, and I actually had a chance to interview him. What happened was his daughter had a hearing problem, and so he brought her to a clinic, and he said, I can't afford, I'm just a barber, and I can't afford this kind of treatment for my daughter. And they said, you know what, we're going to donate this treatment to your daughter. And he was so touched by that, he said, well, what can I do in return? And they said, you know what, you could maybe give haircuts. He said, you're a barber. Why don't you give haircuts to people in need who are maybe going to get a job interview and want to look good? And when I met him, he'd given thousands of haircuts. And on that particular day that I interviewed him, I got to talk to some of the people who were coming in and sitting in that barber's chair. And many of them had very difficult episodes in their life, and just to get the haircut, to know that somebody cared enough to do this for them, really gave them an incredible sense of hope and gratitude, and that they could go out and then get this job. I mean, for the job interview, that they would look good.
Yeah.
And so here's something that everybody, I want everybody to think about. What is my gift? And everybody has a gift they can share, and so that's, I think, one beautiful way to share and spread this idea of hope.
Yes. And you also had some other ideas in the book, like it can be as simple as being patient and giving a kind word while waiting in line at Starbucks, or just it can be so simple.
It can be so many little things that we can do to invite hope. And somebody, I talked to a lady one time who shared in a group that I was running a workshop, and she said that she was still talking about this like months later after it had happened. She said, I was checking out at the, this big garden center, and a woman in front of me turned to me right at the checkout and said, I'd like to buy you a plant, any kind of plant that you'd like. And she says, why are you doing this? She got a little suspicious. She got suspicious, right? And the woman said, this is part of my spiritual practice, is that I want to do something nice for someone. And, so the woman then, she found a rose plant, and something she was talking about that just gave her hope, that helped her see the human kindness and the human spirit, how it could, we could work in a sustainable, caring way with one another.
Yeah,
we didn't have to
be tuned into
we didn't have to tune into the channel of suspicion or bitterness or fear, right?
Yeah.
And you could tune into the hope channel. So
I've actually been doing a lot of free hugs lately.
Wonderful!
Going out with friends and with free hug signs and giving, which is a really fun way to connect. And people are so open to it. It's really amazing.
That's great.
Really
so you're
cool.
finding people are very. Where do you do it?
Wherever it's like in San Francisco by the Ferry Building usually.
Oh, excellent!
It's pretty great.
That's great.
Yeah, and I can hardly believe it. We're almost out of time already.
Wow. Yeah.
And I thought that the subject, ending on the subject of hope, really feels right to me. And I'd like to close with a quote from your book again, which is that with hope, you really do change the world, one small, compassionate act of loving kindness at a time. Whatever your calling may turn out to be, whatever the roles and responsibilities, one of your most important jobs is to serve up hope for those who have little or none, which is just beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that's within our power to do. So thanks for sharing that.
Yes, thank you. And if you want more information on Donald's work and his book, Clearing Emotional Clutter, you can visit him online at mindfulpractices.com. And I also wanted to invite you to join the new Facebook group that we just created for the New World Now podcast. You just need to search for New World Now podcast on Facebook, and and join the group, and we're going to be having real live discussions about the things that we're talking about there. And I have one more favorite ask, which is that if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, we would really appreciate a 5-star review and rating on iTunes. It's a really big way that you can support what we're doing. And to do that, you just need to search for New World Now on iTunes and then click on the review and ratings tab and leave your thoughts there. Would be most appreciated. Yes. And
Kim, and they can sign up for my newsletter, my Mindful Living newsletter at the mindfulpractices.com website, and I have a lot of these clearing emotional clutter practices in every newsletter that comes out.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. Yeah, there's so much practical information that Donald offers in such a way that's really easy to apply to our lives. So I really appreciate you being here with me, Donald, and it's been great fun. It went way, way, way too fast, but that's how it goes sometimes. And I wish all of you a wonderful week, and I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode of New World Now.
Thank you, and all blessings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to New World Now with Kim Corbin from New World Library. New World Library publishes books and audio that inspires and challenges us to improve the quality of our lives and our world. For more information about their books and authors, visit them online at newworldlibrary.com.